The message was not meant for Earth. It was not meant for humans at all. It was a scream thrown into the black between stars, aimed at anyone old enough and powerful enough to care. The Galactic Union had broadcasted on every frequency they had, in every language they knew, begging the cosmos for help. And somehow, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a listening post in northern Chile picked it up. The signal was messy, full of static. The translation software at the facility had never seen anything like it. But buried in the noise was a pattern, and buried in the pattern was a voice, and buried in the voice was a single word that needed no translation at all. Help. Within 6 hours, the message had reached every government on Earth. Within 12, the United Nations had called an emergency session. Within 24, Admiral Rina Obeisai stood before the Global Defense Council and played the signal for every leader in the room. The room went silent. Not because the alien voice was frightening, but because it was crying. Rina was a tall woman with short gray hair and steady hands. She had served 30 years in the Navy before being appointed to lead the newly formed United Earth Defense Corps. She had prepared for a lot of things in her career. First contact with alien life was not one of them. But here she was, and the universe was not waiting for her to catch up. The intelligence teams worked fast. They decoded the rest of the message within 2 days. The Galactic Union was a coalition of over 60 species spread across thousands of star systems. They had existed for longer than human civilization. They had laws, trade routes, art, music, philosophy, and they were dying. Something called the hollow tide had come out of the dark spaces between galaxies. No one knew what it was exactly. A fleet, maybe a swarm, a living hunger that consumed planets and moved on. It had already eaten through 3 outer systems and was pushing inward. The Union had no military. Their ships were built for science and trade, not war. Their entire civilization was built on the idea that intelligent life did not destroy. And now something that did not care about that idea was tearing them apart. Rina presented the findings to the council. She did not sugarcoat it. She told them Earth had only recently cracked faster than light travel. Their ships were untested. Their soldiers had never fought in space. They had no allies out there, no support, no supply lines. Going would be a risk unlike anything humanity had ever taken. Then she told them what would happen if it did not go. The hollow tide would keep moving. System after system would fall. And eventually, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 50, it would reach this arm of the galaxy. It would reach Earth. And by then, there would be no one left to call for help. The vote was unanimous. Every nation, every leader, not a single hand stayed down. Rina had expected debate. She had expected fear and hesitation in politics. Instead, she got silence. And then she got a room full of people standing up. She would remember that moment for the rest of her life. The moment humanity looked at a galaxy full of strangers and said yes without knowing what it would cost. The shipyards moved faster than anyone thought possible. Carrier ships were loaded. Fighters were fueled. Ground units were assembled from every branch of every military on the planet. Volunteers flooded the recruitment offices so fast that they had to turn people away. Rina watched the numbers climb and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Pride. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that comes when people choose to do something hard simply because it is right. 72 hours after the vote, the first fleet launched from orbit. 12 carriers, 40 escort ships, 10,000 soldiers. It was not a large force by galactic standards. Rina knew that, but it was everything Earth had. And they were sending all of IT. As the fleet entered faster than light travel, a monitoring station on one of the Union border worlds detected the human ships. The officer on duty, a thin-limbed creature with 4 eyes and lavender skin, stared at the readings and called his superior. His superior called the council. The council looked at the data and could not understand what they were seeing. The species that had answered the call was not one of the elder races. It was not a civilization with 1,000-year-old fleets or ancient weapons. It was a young, uncontacted species from a small planet orbiting an average star. A species that had only just learned to leave its own system. A species the Union had never spoken to, never traded with, never even formally acknowledged, and they were coming anyway. The Union counselors exchanged confused looks. One of them asked how long it would take the human fleet to arrive. The answer came back in a number so small that several counselors asked the officer to repeat it. He did. The number did not change. They were not just coming. They were running. Rena sat in her command chair aboard the carrier Resolute and watched the stars blur into lines outside the viewport. She did not know what was waiting for them out there. She did not know if her ships would survive. She did not know if any of them would ever see Earth again. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: someone had called for help. And humanity had never been very good at looking the other way. The Mirati homeworld was burning when the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. From orbit, Commander Deo Amari could see the glow of fires stretching across entire continents. Thick columns of black smoke rose from cities that had stood for thousands of years. The planet looked like it was bleeding light. Deo had seen war before. He had fought in 3 different conflicts on Earth, led soldiers through desert heat and mountain cold, held dying friends in the mud. But he had never seen anything like this. An entire world choking on its own destruction. And the things doing the destroying were still down there. The Holotide had landed on the surface 2 days earlier. Union relief ships held a wide perimeter in orbit, their shields up, their weapons cold. They were watching. Just watching. Deo opened a channel to the nearest Union vessel and asked why they were not engaging. The response came in translated, clipped tones. Their doctrine did not permit offensive action. They were there to evacuate, not to fight. Deo closed the channel. He looked at the burning world below. Then he looked at his soldiers, packed into drop ships and ready to go. They were young, scared, far from home, and every single one of them had volunteered that he gave the order. The drop ships punched through the atmosphere like iron fists through paper. The heat shield screamed. The hulls rattled. Smoke swallowed them the moment they broke through the cloud layer. Deo could not see the ground until they were 200 meters above it, and what he saw made his stomach turn. The Mirati were insectoid creatures, about the size of large dogs, with shimmering wings and delicate limbs. They built their cities from material that looked like hardened honey, golden and translucent. Those cities were now rubble. The Holotide moved through the ruins like a dark fog, shapeless and hungry, pulling apart everything it touched. Buildings, trees, bodies. The drop ships landed hard in a clearing on the edge of a destroyed city. Soldiers poured out in heavy atmosphere suits, weapons up, boots hitting alien soil for the first time in human history. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just smoke and fire and the sound of something terrible moving through the ruins ahead. Deo led the first squad into the city. The air was thick with ash. Visibility was almost zero. They moved by heat signature and sound, pushing through collapsed streets and shattered structures. The Holotide was not like any enemy Deo had ever faced. It did not have soldiers. It did not have formations. It was more like a living disease, spreading and consuming. But it could be hurt. The first squad discovered that when a burst of concentrated fire caused a section of the fog to shrink back, screaming in a frequency that made their teeth ache, they pushed forward, block by block, ruin by ruin, and in the rubble, they began to find survivors. The Mirati were hiding in the basements of their collapsed buildings, huddled together in clusters, their wings folded tight against their bodies. They were shaking. Some were injured. Many were barely alive. Deo's soldiers pulled them out one by one, carrying them through the smoke to the landing zone, where medics were already setting up field stations. That it was during the third extraction that Deo met Salif. The Mirati elder was standing in the remains of what had once been a great hall, surrounded by a group of young Mirati. Salif was old. His wings were cracked and dull, but he stood between the young ones and the approaching darkness with nothing but his own body as a shield. That Deo's squad pushed the Holotide back from the hall and secured the area. When it was safe, Deo approached Salif and knelt down so they were at the same level. Salif looked at him with wide, golden eyes. The translator clipped to Deo's suit picked up the elder's words and converted them into English. "What are you?" Salif asked. "Human," Deo said. "From Earth. I do not know this Earth." "That is all right. We heard you needed help. Sala stared at him for a long time. Around them, human soldiers carried wounded Mirati through the smoke, their suits scorched, their breathing heavy. One soldier had taken off her helmet to give water to a Mirati child. Her face was covered in soot and sweat. She was smiling. "You do not know us," Salith said quietly. "Why would you come here and bleed for us?" Deo looked at the burning city. He looked at the young Mirati clinging to Salith's legs. He looked at the dark wall of the hollow tide, still pressing against the edges of their perimeter, hungry and patient. "You called," he said simply. "We came. That is enough." The battle for the Mirati homeworld lasted 4 days. The humans could not save all of it. 2 of the 3 major continents were too far gone, but they held the third. They pushed the hollow tide back to the coastline and kept it there while evacuation ships carried millions of Mirati to safety in orbit that it cost them. 67 human soldiers died on that world. Their names were recorded and sent back to Earth. They were the first humans to ever die on alien soil, and they died pulling strangers out of the fire. Word spread fast across the Union communication channels. The species that had come to fight were not one of the elder races. They were young, small, from a dangerous little planet no one had heard of, and they had charged straight into the smoke without hesitation. The galaxy had never seen anything like it, and it did not know what to make of these strange, stubborn, terrifyingly brave creatures called humans. The great chamber of the Galactic Union was shaped like the inside of a seashell, spiraling upward in gentle curves, with seats carved from pale stone rising in tiers. Representatives from over 60 species filled the room, their bodies ranging from the enormous to the tiny, their voices a low hum of translated whispers. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something floral that Rena Obesai could not name. She stood at the center of the chamber floor, alone, wearing her dress uniform. No guards, no advisors. Just her in a room full of aliens who were not sure if she was a savior or a second disaster. High Counselor Fea of the Lisari spoke first. Fea was tall and thin, with skin so pale it was almost transparent. Blue veins pulsed visibly beneath the surface. Her voice was soft, but carried through the chamber like wind through glass. "We acknowledge the actions of your species on the Mirati homeworld," Fea said. "The Council is grateful, but gratitude does not erase concern." Rena nodded. She had expected this. "Your planet," Fea continued, "is classified in our records as a Category 12 environment. Extreme gravity, toxic atmosphere fluctuations, predatory ecosystems at every level. Your species evolved not beside danger, but inside it." A display appeared in the air above the chamber floor. Images of Earth, volcanoes, hurricanes, sharks, wolves, soldiers marching through mud, cities burning, mushroom clouds rising over flat deserts. The representatives shifted in their seats. Some looked away. "Your history," Fea said, her voice very careful now, "is a record of violence. You have fought yourselves for your entire existence. Wars over land, wars over belief, wars over resources so small that our analysts could not understand why they mattered. You have weapons capable of ending your own world, and you built them on purpose." The chamber was silent. Every eye, every sensor, every organ of perception in the room was fixed on Rena. "So the question before this council," Fea said, "is simple. How do we know that by inviting you here, we have not simply replaced one threat with another?" Rena let the silence sit for a moment. Then she spoke. "Everything you just showed is true," she said. "All of it. We have done terrible things to each other. We have burned cities and split atoms and turned our own sky against us. I am not going to stand here and pretend otherwise." She looked up at the tiers of alien faces watching her. "But you left something out of that presentation. You showed our wars. You did not show what came after. You showed the fire. You did not show the people who ran into it to pull strangers out. Every time we have destroyed, we have also rebuilt. Every time we have fallen, someone has reached down and lifted us back up. That is the other half of what we are. And that is the half that answered your call." She paused. "You are afraid of us because we know violence. I understand that. But that is exactly why we can help you. We know what the hollow tide is because we have seen it before. Not the same shape, not the same name, but the same hunger. And we have been fighting things like it since before we could write. Faya studied her for a long time. She did not speak. The chamber waited, thousands of light years away, on a refugee ship drifting in the safe zone behind the Union defense line. A field medic named A.O. Diallo was elbow-deep in work she had never trained for. The ship was packed with survivors from 3 different species. A.O. had basic xenobiology training from a crash course given during the flight from Earth, but nothing had prepared her for this. The Mirati had a circulatory system based on copper, not iron. Their blood was blue. Their bones were hollow. She had to learn on the fly, and she had to learn fast because they kept coming. The worst case was a clutch of Mirati larvae. 23 of them, each no bigger than a human fist, sealed inside soft, glowing pods. The pods had been damaged during the evacuation. The temperature controls were failing. If the pods got too cold, the larvae would die. Ao did not sleep. She sat beside the incubation unit for 41 hours straight, manually adjusting the heat, feeding nutrients through tubes she had improvised from medical supplies, talking softly to the pods, even though she knew the larvae could not hear her. The alien nurses on the ship watched her from across the room. They did not understand why she was doing this. These were not her young. This was not her species. At AKT hour 38, Ao's hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold a nutrient tube. An alien nurse, Elise Sari with long, gentle fingers, approached her and offered to take over. Ao shook her head. Almost there, she whispered. Just a little longer. At hour 41, the last larva stabilized. All 23 survived. Ao fell asleep right there on the floor beside the incubation pod, her cheek pressed against the warm surface, her hand still resting on the glass. The alien nurses stood over her in silence. One of them reached down and placed a thin blanket over her shoulders. It was a small gesture, but it was the first time a member of their species had ever cared for a human. Back in the council chamber, the debate continued for hours. But something had shifted. The reports from the Mirati homeworld were spreading. Stories of human soldiers carrying wounded aliens through fire. Stories of medics working until they collapsed. Stories of a species that fought like predators but wept like children when they could not save everyone. Faya listened to all of it. She did not change her vote that day, but she did not speak against the humans again either. And in the quiet halls outside the chamber, Rina Obesai leaned against a wall and let out a breath she had been holding since she arrived. She had told the galaxy the truth about humanity. Now, she had to hope the galaxy was brave enough to believe it. The hollow tide was born in a dead star system at the edge of nothing. 3 collapsed suns, cold and dark, orbited each other in a slow, silent dance. Between them hung a mass of living shadow, so vast it bent the light around it. This was the heart. This was where the hunger lived. The combined fleet arrived at dawn. Not a real dawn, because there was no sun to rise, but the fleet commanders had agreed on a time and called it dawn anyway, because soldiers needed a word for the moment they marched forward. IT was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. 470 ships from 38 species, arranged in a formation that had taken Rina Obesai and the Union strategists 2 sleepless weeks to design. Lisari science vessels carried experimental resonance weapons. Mirati scout ships mapped the tide's movements in real time. Heavy cruisers from 6 different species formed a ring around the main assault force. And at the tip of the spear, right at the front where the darkness was thickest, were the human ships. Luke Ndaba stood on the bridge of the Resolute. The ship had been repaired after the battle at Arthas, but the scars were still visible. Welding lines ran across the hull like stitches on skin. The port engine housing had been replaced with a part from Union frigate because there were no human parts left. It did not match. Luke did not care. All ships, he said into the fleet channel. This is Captain Daba. We go in fast. We hit hard. We do not stop. When you see the heart, you fire everything you have. And when it is done, we go home. The fleet moved. The hollow tide met them in the space between the dead suns. It was different here at its source. Thicker, angrier. It moved with purpose, like a living thing defending its nest. Tendrils of dark matter lashed out at the incoming ships, wrapping around hulls, pulling at shields, trying to drag them into the black. The human warships hit it first. They punched through the outer layer with concentrated fire and kept pushing, burning a corridor through the swarm. Behind them, the Union ships widened the path, their resonance weapons disrupting the tide structure and forcing it to pull back. IT was working. Slowly, painfully, but it was working. The fleet carved its way deeper into the heart of the tide, losing ships with every kilometer. Elisari cruiser was crushed. 2 Mirati scouts were swallowed. A human destroyer lost its shields and was torn apart before the crew could evacuate. But they did not stop. They did not turn back. They kept going because there was nothing else to do except keep going. Luke's ship reached the inner boundary first. The heart of the hollow tide hung before him like a wound in the universe, a sphere of absolute darkness that swallowed every photon that touched it. His sensors could not read it. His weapons could not lock onto it. It was not matter. It was not energy. It was something else, something older, something that existed before the first stars were born and would exist long after the last ones died. All ships, Luke said, target the heart. Everything you have. On my mark. The fleet formed up behind him. 470 ships from 38 species, all pointing their weapons at the same spot, all waiting for the word of the fisherman's grandson from Mozambique. Fire. The universe turned white. Every weapon in the fleet discharged at once. Beams of light and energy and sound and things that had no name converged on the heart of the hollow tide. The darkness screamed. It was not a sound that traveled through space. It was a sound that traveled through minds, through bones, through the fabric of reality itself. Every being in the fleet felt it. Some cried, some prayed, some just closed their eyes and held on. The Resolute shook so hard that Luke was thrown from his chair. Warning lights filled the bridge. The reactor was overheating. The hull was cracking. His crew held it together by hand, physically bracing the reactor housing while the engineers worked to stabilize it. They held it for 90 seconds. 90 seconds of fire and noise and blinding light. And then it was over. The heart collapsed. The hollow tide, severed from its source, came apart like fog in sunlight. Across 1,000 star systems, the darkness that had consumed worlds simply dissolved, leaving behind empty space and silence. Luke sat on the floor of his bridge and listened to the silence. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. The galaxy rebuilt slowly. The scars would take generations to heal. Entire worlds had been lost. Species had been displaced. The damage was beyond anything anyone could fully measure. But they were alive. All of them. Together, a memorial was built in orbit above Arthas. It was a simple structure, a ring of polished stone floating in the light of the yellow star. On its surface, an inscription was carved in 400 languages. The words were the same in every one. They heard us cry. They came through the smoke. They did not ask for anything in return. Rena Obeisai returned to Earth 6 months after the final battle. She stepped off the shuttle on its solid ground and stood still for a long time, feeling the wind on her face, smelling grass and salt and rain. Real rain. A reporter was waiting at the edge of the landing pad. He asked her the question that everyone on Earth had been asking since the war ended. Admiral, why did we do it? Why did humanity risk everything for species we had never even met? Rena looked at the sky. It was evening. The first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere up there, between those points of light, were worlds she had fought for, people she had bled for, friends she had buried in the dark between suns. She smiled. It was a tired smile, but a real one. Because someone had to, she said. And we have never been very good at standing still while others suffer. She turned and walked away from the cameras toward the sound of the ocean, toward home. Above her, the stars burned on, and the galaxy, for the first time in a very long time, was quiet. Rain fell on the ruins of the Mirati city. Not real rain. The atmosphere processors had been damaged in the fighting, and moisture was leaking from broken climate towers in uneven sheets. It fell warm and tasted like metal, pooling in craters where buildings used to stand. Deo Amari sat on a broken wall at the edge of what had once been a market square. His rifle lay across his knees. His boots were caked in gray dust that used to be someone's home. He had not slept in 2 days, and his body had stopped asking for it. There was a place beyond Tired where the world went flat and quiet, and Deo had been living in that place for weeks now. Salith found him there. The old Murati moved slowly through the rubble, his cracked wings folded against his back, his golden eyes reflecting the dim light of the broken sky. He settled beside Deo without a word. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was Salith who broke the silence. "I have been trying to understand your kind," the elder said. His translated voice was gentle, like dry leaves brushing against stone. "I have watched your soldiers carry our wounded. I have watched your medics save our children. I have watched your ships burn in our sky so that our people could escape. And I still do not understand." Deo looked at him. "What part?" "All of it," Salith said. "You come from a world that tried to kill you every day of your existence. Your history is full of suffering. Your bodies are scarred, your minds are heavy, and you carry grief the way my people carry song. And yet, when you heard strangers crying in the dark, you came running." "Why?" Deo was quiet for a while. The metallic rain tapped against his helmet, which sat on the ground beside him. "Back on Earth," he said slowly, "we have floods. Big ones. The kind that swallow entire towns in a single night. And every time it happens, people show up. Strangers. They drive for hours. They bring boats they built in their garages. They wade into brown water up to their chests to pull people off rooftops. Nobody tells them to. Nobody pays them. They just show up." He picked up a piece of rubble and turned it over in his hands. "We have fires too. Forest fires that move faster than you can run. And firefighters walk into them, toward the flames, not away. They do it because somewhere in that fire, there might be someone who needs help. That is it. That is the whole reason." Salith tilted his head. "But you are afraid. I have seen it. Your hands shake. Your hearts beat fast. You are not without fear." "No," Deo said. "We are full of fear. We are probably the most afraid species you will ever meet. But we have had a lot of practice at being afraid and showing up anyway. That is the thing about humans, Salith. We do not wait until we are brave. We just go, and we figure out the bravery part on the way." Salith was silent for a long time. Then he reached out with one of his delicate limbs and rested it on Deo's arm. It was the first time a Miradi had willingly touched a human. Deo did not move. He just sat there in a rain with an old alien's hand on his arm. And for a moment, the war felt very far away. But the war was not far away. It was everywhere. Back on Arthas, the Galactic Union Council was fracturing. The hollow tide had been stalled, but not stopped. It was regrouping in the dark spaces, growing, feeding on the systems it had already consumed. Fear was doing what the tide could not do on its own. It was breaking the coalition apart. 3 species had already voted to surrender. They wanted to offer the tide uninhabited systems as a kind of sacrifice, hoping it would be satisfied and leave the rest alone. 5 others wanted to weaponize the humans, to point them at the tide like a loaded gun and let them do the dirty work while the Union watched from safety. Rena Obesai stood before the council again. She was tired. The lines on her face had deepened since the last time she had been in this chamber. But her voice was steady. "You do not need to become like us," she said. "That is not what we are asking. We are not asking you to learn to fight. We are not asking you to build weapons. We are asking you to stand. That is all. Stand beside us. Hold the line with us. Not because you are warriors, but because you are alive, and the things that are alive should stand together against the things that want to eat them." The chamber was quiet. "If you send us out there alone," Rena continued, "we will go. We will fight until we cannot fight anymore. That is what we do, but we will lose. Not because we are not strong enough, but because no one is strong enough alone. Not even us." She looked directly at Fea. The Lisari counselor sat very still, her translucent skin showing the rapid pulse of her blue veins. "You asked me if we were a threat," Rena said. "I told you the truth. We are dangerous. But right now, dangerous is what the galaxy needs. And we are asking you to trust us." The vote took 3 hours. It was not unanimous. But when it was done, the coalition held. 38 species voted to stand with the humans. And among them, for the first time, was the vote of High Counselor Fea. She did not explain her decision. She did not make a speech. She simply pressed her vote and sat back in her chair, her pale hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on something no one else in the room could see. Rena nodded at her from across the chamber. Fea did not nod back, but she did not look away either. The galaxy was going to fight. Together. And it was going to start tomorrow. The hollow tide came for Arthas on a day that had no name in human calendars. It came in silence, the way deep water moves, slow and heavy and impossible to stop. From the bridge of the carrier Resolute, Captain Luke Ndaba watched the sensor screen fill with contacts until numbers stopped making sense. 312. That was the count before the system gave up trying to separate individual targets. After that, the hollow tide was just a wall, a single dark mass stretching across the void between stars, swallowing light as it moved. Luke was 34 years old. He had grown up in a fishing village on the coast of Mozambique, where his grandmother had taught him to read the ocean by the color of the sky. He had joined the Navy at 18, earned his command at 30, and been reassigned to the Defense Corps when the signal from the stars arrived. He had never imagined he would die this far from the sea, but he was not thinking about dying. He was thinking about the 12 ships behind him and the billions of lives behind them. Arthas was the Union capital. For inhabited worlds orbited a gentle yellow star, home to over 9 billion beings from 40 different species. It was the heart of galactic civilization. Libraries older than human language. Hospitals that could regrow entire limbs. Gardens that stretched across continents, filled with plants from 1,000 worlds. If Arthas fell, the Union would break apart. Everyone knew that. The hollow tide knew it too. The Union fleet was already in position. 200 ships, elegant and silver, arranged in a wide defensive arc. They were beautiful. They were also useless. Union ships were built for speed and science. Their weapons were designed to deflect asteroids and disable pirate vessels. Against the hollow tide, they would last minutes. Luke opened a channel to Admiral Obeisai aboard the command station in high orbit. Admiral, requesting permission to take the forward position. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Rena's voice came through, calm and steady. You understand what that means, Captain? Yes, ma'am. 12 ships against that. Yes, ma'am. Another pause. Luke could hear her breathing. Then she said, permission granted. Hold the line, Luke. Understood. He closed the channel and looked at his bridge crew. They were young. The youngest was 19. They looked back at him with wide eyes and tight jaws, and not one of them looked away. All ships, Luke said over the fleet channel, form up on my position. We're the front line. Nothing gets past US. The 12 human warships moved forward, past the Union fleet, past the defense stations, past the last line of safety. They arranged themselves in a staggered formation, each ship covering the gaps of the others, and they waited. The hollow tide hit them like a wave hitting a wall. The first hour was chaos. The hollow tide did not fight like a fleet. It fought like a flood, pressing against every surface, looking for cracks. It wrapped around ships and tried to pull them apart. It sent tendrils of dark matter through shield gaps and hull seams. The human ships fired everything they had, punching holes in the swarm that closed almost immediately. Luke used every trick he knew. He pulled tactics from every war humanity had ever fought. He used feints, drawing sections of the tide toward one ship before hitting it from the sides. He used controlled retreats, falling back just enough to create kill zones where concentrated fire could do the most damage. He used close-range broadsides, flying his ships so near to the tide that their hulls scraped against the darkness. 3 hours in, the destroyer Abaddon took a direct hit. The tide punched through its reactor housing, and the ship came apart in a flash of white light. 92 crew. Gone. Luke did not have time to grieve. He closed the gap and kept fighting. 5 hours in, the frigate Natal lost its engines. The crew abandoned ship in escape pods while the tide consumed the hull. Luke ordered 2 ships to cover the pods until they reached the Union line. 7 hours in, the carrier Soweto was boarded. The tide got inside. The crew fought it in the corridors with hand weapons and fire suppression systems, and, In the end, their bare hands. They held it long enough for the engineers to overload the secondary reactor. The explosion took out the Soweto and a massive chunk of the tide with it. 0.9 hours. 3 ships lost, 214 crew dead, and the line held. Luke stood on his bridge, bleeding from a cut above his eye, his uniform torn, his voice raw. He opened a broadcast channel, not encrypted, not private, open so that every ship, every station, every receiver in the system could hear him. "This is Captain Luke Ndaba of the Earth Defense Corps," he said. "To the hollow tide, to anything else listening. Nobody gets past us. Nobody on our this 9 billion beings heard that voice." Most of them had never heard a human speak before. They did not know what Earth was. They did not know who Luke Ndaba was. But they understood the words. And for the first time since the hollow tide appeared, they felt something other than fear on the Union flagship. A Lee Sari officer turned to his captain and said quietly, "They are still fighting." The captain looked at the tactical display. 12 tiny dots holding back an ocean of darkness. 9 hours. No retreat. No surrender. "Yes," the captain said. "They are." The human fleet held the line for 3 more hours until reinforcements arrived from the outer systems. When it was over, Luke sat down in his command chair and stared at the viewport. The stars were still there. Artemis was still there. His hands were shaking. He thought about the sea back home. He thought about his grandmother. He thought about 92 crew on the Abaddon who would never go home. Then he wiped the blood from his eye and started writing the letters to their families.